Hi, welcome to ComSpeak, the talk show where we bring to you a communication leader who shares with us their life's journey, their professional achievements, and stories from their careers which have made a difference to them and the organization they worked for. Today we have Madhavi Jha. She is the Chief Communications Officer at Cairn India. After having spent several years in 2 or 3 large corporations in the world of technology, she now works in the oil and gas sector at a leader called Cairn Oil Gas. Welcome, Madhavi, and thanks for being with us today at ComSpeak.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us more about your childhood, where you grew up, which school and college you went to, before we come and talk about your professional journey that happened later on.
I'll talk about school and college after. My fondest memories of childhood are the fact that I've had a charmed upbringing. My father was in the Indian Forest Service and served the forest for his life. He's a true blue forester, having walked miles and miles. You know, those were the days when forest officers would walk the forests on foot, 30-40 kilometers a day. I had the privilege of pretty much every weekend and every summer vacation and winter vacation being out there with him. Of course, apart from vacations, but out there in the jungles, walking in the forests, being really close to wildlife.
As well, where you...
I was, born in Bilaspur in Chhattisgarh, which was then in Madhya Pradesh, and then we were all over MP, which was his cadre. So all very green areas. It was another experience living in the forest compounds, and I think I learned a lot more outside school than I did at school, which is not to belittle the school experience, but nothing beats nature and wildlife, and that still remains a passion.
Right.
I changed 7 schools because of that, and all of them were in really small towns, what you would call, the Mufassal countryside, if you like. What is fascinating is, I think, the global awareness that my younger brother and I had, also thanks to my father significantly, is because we had about 3,000 or 4,000 books, significantly English and American literature lying around the house. So beginning from Reader's Digest at the age of 6 through to Alice in Wonderland, and then on to Ernest Hemingway or Jane Austen, I had polished all of these off before I got to college, which of course took me to an English literature degree from Miranda House in Delhi University, and then onward to IIPM, where I did an MBA in marketing.
So one of your first jobs was with CII. How did that job come about? Tell us about that story.
I think it was fortuitous. I was not planning to be in the not-for-profit sector or to be in an industry chamber. I think it is a great place to have cut my teeth on, because early in my career, I was first handling, with some very senior leaders, the Central and East European economies, and then the Asia Pacific countries in the international division of CII. Now, we know that CII works to position the India brand overseas, or the India Inc. brand overseas, which meant that, in a pretty lean team, earlier of 5 people and then of 3 for Asia Pacific, we were, reading up on the macroeconomics or the bilateral trade of the regions, defining the charter for the region, what delegations, what we would take, what conferences we needed to curate, depending on the, the current affairs of the period.
Right. And what led to you moving into communications and marketing communications role from CII? Did it happen at CII, or was it when you moved to your next job that the marketing communications role came your way?
Turned out that at CII, I was strong in content. I mean, of course, coming from a literature background, so I got used a lot for writing, including a whole bunch of reports from CII. So again, a lot of research and writing there. When HCL hired me, they were looking for somebody who would handle their external influencers. They wanted somebody who would handle their relationships with NASSCOM or the World Economic Forum or CII. And because I came from inside a forum, you know how the cogwheels turn. So again, a very wide exposure that did not limit me to PR, but to content, media relations, of course PR, internal communication, executive positioning, a little bit of understanding of the brand strategy of a company. HCL was pretty strong, including even now in their advertising thinking as well. You remember Mr. HCL. So that was my entry into the world of communication.
You've already spoken of CII and HCL, and we'll move to your other ventures a little later. And you mentioned a few names of people you worked with in both these stints. So pick out 1 or 2 of those gentlemen that you mentioned. I don't think you had women bosses. You worked with in CII and HCL. And what are the 2 things or 1 thing you learned from each of these bosses?
In fact, I worked with women bosses in both my first stint in the Central and East European economies in CII, and then in Asia Pacific.
Feel free to share any of your learnings from one of
I
those bosses.
will, because I think they are early contributors to my career. That's right. So Aparna Dutt, who later became the CEO of the India Brand Equity Foundation after Ajay Khanna. Aparna was who I was reporting to when I was working on the Europe economies. Then I moved to working and reporting to Neerja Bhatia, who later became the CII Southeast Asia Regional Representative Office Leader. And she's back in India now, I think on special projects, if I'm not sure. She's still with CII. So, Aparna came from The Economist, and I think the rigor in terms of language, the strengths in content, and the need to be accurate and, exactly or aptly expressive, marrying creativity with accuracy is something I learned from Aparna, because The Economist, not many publications can beat the way they write. From Neerja, who was the sort of manager who had all her fingers in 10 pies or more, I learned multitasking. I learned the ability to sort of put down your head and do what it takes. I've sat and, white inked 2,000 brochures once. So, never say no to work is something I learned from Neerja.
And tell us about your bosses at HCL and what you learned from them.
I think, the ability to work with somebody who's as cerebral and a maverick like Shiv was one of the most outstanding experiences, because Shiv would wake up every day, from a different side of the bed, and he would come up with a new idea. So exposure to that kind of thinking, coming up with new projects every day, and just having that hunger and, maybe sometimes even the inability to say no is something that pushes you to cross all boundaries, think out of the box, kind of push the envelope, do all of those good things. That was fascinating as well. And then Honeywell was looking for somebody who had a sense of PR, internal communications, brand, as well as corporate social responsibility. And since I landed up having dabbled in all of these disciplines at HCL, it worked. It just was a great fit. I remember that the job description said 15 years of experience, and I joined them at 9. Wow. So it was a big deal for me at that point of time. American multinationals are known for their, death by process. Right. So it was interesting because, I had just worked in a very entrepreneurial, HCL was a large company. It was 5.7 billion already in 30 countries. But it was still a very entrepreneurial company. It was a first generation, startup, and that is the kind of appetite it has. You're moving in all directions every day. Decisions happen fast. I could call up my founder and chairman. I could call up Shiv and say, this is happening. I need a statement from you in the next hour. And I would get that statement in the next hour. And here I was in a global multinational where everything was driven by process. It was fascinating because I remember in an internal communication document, and I'm just using an example of how detail-oriented processes can get, where we were writing about the potential scenarios that we might need to handle, but because we were shutting down a manufacturing unit. I remember writing 27 scenarios, and what would be the external communication, what would be the holding statement, what would be the internal communication strategy, what would the manager say on the shop floor for all 27 scenarios.
So, I heard of you for the first time about 4 years ago when you were at Honeywell. One of your PR partners, whose name we won't discuss now, she told me, we were doing a conclave together, tiny conclave where her global leader was coming to India. She said, you have a great list of invitees, but I don't see Madhavi Jha's name there. You should get Madhavi Jha. I said, Madhavi Jha who? She said, Honeywell. I said, I've never heard of her. She said, now you've heard of her. Get her to come. And I think I reached out to you, but you missed that mail or you did not come. And then I asked, the name is Valerie Pinto. I asked Valerie, why do you ask me to invite Madhavi? She said, Madhavi is the smartest young corpcom person I know of.
Thank you, Valerie.
and you should meet her and know her as well. And I think it took us a long while to finally meet when Anshul connected us to each other a year ago or so. So my question is something that can inspire younger people as well. What goes into making ordinary men and women like yourself smart? So what is it that is different and makes you be seen by people as somebody to look up to, somebody that can inspire? So tell us the ingredients that goes into making somebody smart.
You need to have hunger. I don't think it is material if you're a communicator or an engineer or an accountant or, whichever field you are in. If you do not make it personal to do a job well, or it is a matter of your reputation, if it is not, then you will never excel. In communication, I've learned 2 or 3 things, again, from my business leaders, very often CEOs, because, I think the highest pressures are experienced by the CEO of any company. People who have bottom line and P&L accountability. Number one is, as a communicator, you must know your business better than anybody else, right? So a business leader may know, the numbers of a part of the, a business unit or a certain vertical. But a communicator for the company should be the master of the content for the company and should be able to give that 3-minute elevator pitch better than anybody else in the company. Out of, all of those 15,000 or whatever number of people you have in the country, you should be better than anybody else. If you do not understand your business and your content well, you cannot be a communicator. You may be a reasonable manager, you may get by, you can become assistant manager and then program manager and then manager, so which is a very linear sort of progression in any profession. But if you really need to take leaps, you can do that in 5 years or 7 years of experience, or maybe a little more. The point is to be aware and understand your business extremely well. Be very good at what you do, and I think accuracy, a command of the language you have to work in matters a great deal. And finally, third thing, be respectful of your leader's time.
I agree with what you say. I completely relate to it as well. And I don't have an answer myself to it, but how do today's generation of people born in the 90s figure out these things? I mean, I think some of us born in the late 70s, early 80s, figure it out. I don't know how, we have to dig deeper. But what goes into helping the younger generation figure out these things of doing things with plan A, plan B, plan C, and the other things you just said, of becoming outstanding, smart people in their own right?
You will be lucky if you have a manager who invests that kind of time in you and will provide that input. Otherwise, if you're interested in your career, you have to learn by imbibing. You watch how your leaders or other managers operate and you pick the best of what you see around yourself.
80s and 90s, for a simple reason, I meet a lot of youngsters, both in terms of I go to companies to sometimes do interactions and talks, and they're all in their early 20s. And then there are people I interviewed for our school in Mumbai, the PR school as well. And the difference I find from this generation and those I've met slightly older is the curiosity factor is completely missing. People don't ask too many questions now. They think everything is ready-made, everything's easy, which the early generations asked. And I think that's becoming a hindrance to work better in current times, at least in the comms and communication sphere. Maybe that's not the same in management, in marketing. You have the same groups of smart people in every decade, and I get that. That's where I was coming from. And then after your stint with HCL, Honeywell, you've now been for a little over a year with Cairn Oil and Gas, which is a completely different ball game, different field, different domain entirely. How did that happen? Why did you choose, or why did Cairn choose you to be part of their comms team as a leader in India?
It was a deliberate choice. I was tossing up between another technology multinational and an Indian oil and gas or an industrial sector company. I mean, CII was another thing altogether, but between HCL and Honeywell, it was significantly IT, ITES, software industrial. And I decided to take the, path less taken.
Yeah.
So I decided to go the industrial way because it was something I had not done before. Oil and gas or the natural resources sector is a sector where communication is more critical, if you like. Technology is pretty much always a good story to tell. And so to moving from the software into IT, ITS technology, software industrial to industrial was a deliberate choice. It's been fascinating. For the first 3 months, I was just learning how oil is even extracted.
Right.
It's
a steep learning curve for you.
It's been fascinating.
You read a lot of books on energy and...
No, I did something very lazy and clever. I began by setting up, quick recording interviews with all of my technology leaders in the company. You'll be surprised. I came into oil and gas thinking that this will... I didn't even know.
Right.
The point is that out of 1900 people, about only 500 are non-technical. Everybody else is a geophysicist, seismologist, chemistry, something or the other, petroleum engineer. Everybody else is a technology person. So the technology background came in handy, surprisingly and pleasantly so. And I set about just recording these interviews and asking, very journalist-like questions. Okay, so what does exploration entail? Starting from there, how do you explore, oil and gas? What does seismic technology even do? What do you do in it? Do you send electromagnetic resonance? So starting from those primers, and of course, it gave me a lot of content to work with, but that was my classroom. Yes, it was a steep learning.
And Cairn is part of the Vedanta group, and I know the group in India globally is always prone to risk, issues, crisis all the time, and we hear crises of different kinds every few months. I'm sure you've gone through some of those in the last 1 year you've been there. So your learning at Honeywell and maybe HCL to some extent, and you mentioned what happened at Honeywell, has been, I'm sure, a great asset for you to deal with these crises as well. So tell us more about how you as a professional look at crisis, and what about a crisis energizes you, excites you, or it doesn't. Tell us your take on crisis in general.
You know, it's exciting because it tests your limits and your abilities as a communicator. It is frustrating because you spend a lot of what you think could be productive time in putting out a positive campaign or stories out there, in sort of having to combat the negative stories. But like I said, it's a challenge. It's been fascinating, and when you do it well, it's it feels very gratifying.
You are one of India's younger chief communications officers of a large company. A lot of people aspire to be in this job in their late 40s or early 50s. You've got it, you're barely 40. What's your sense of where you will be 5 years from now?
I've been thinking about it, frankly, and I wouldn't say this at Cairn that I'm planning this or that. But 5 years hence, Amith, you know what? And this kind of goes back to some of the questions you asked about how do you leapfrog or how do you become good at what you do? It could be communication or anything else. I've had this, desire to potentially get into training, if not consulting, because I think in our generation, simply because we were still a generation,
Right.
after our fathers and mothers, who had to do whatever it took to have a stable career or, bring that money home every month or whatever.
Right.
So we wouldn't switch that easily. We wouldn't change our minds that easily. And we would do what it takes,
Yeah.
To get the job done.
So I was right about 90s and 80s, right?
Sort of.
What else do you do, or what do you do to unwind? What's your favorite leisure activity?
My favorite leisure activity is horseback riding.
Right.
I learned it when I turned 40.
Wow.
Though I've always loved horses and animals,
Yeah.
like I mentioned. That's my favorite. It kind of dropped
How
down
often
a little
do you
bit.
go horse riding?
Until last year, I was going up to 2 or 3 times a week. I'm about to resume it maybe in a week's time again, so I'm really excited. Other than which, I'm a movie buff, I go shopping, I love cooking, I'm a foodie.
Nice.
And because I'm a foodie, I must horse ride.
Right. You should. I think it's been a fascinating chat with you. Before we conclude, I'm going to do a quick rapid fire with you. 10
Sure.
questions in like 60 seconds.
Okay.
You can take a couple of more seconds for some questions if you want to give me longer answers, but no time to think. We'll start with that and then wrap up if there's anything else we missed out on. Which is your most trusted brand?
Tag Heuer.
Tag Heuer, okay. Your favorite book?
I think I've read The Fountainhead like 8 times.
Wow.
Pride and Prejudice similarly. And every time I read it, I can read it again and just enjoy
Right.
it just as much. Ernest Hemingway is another writer. I enjoyed The Old Man and the Sea. For some reason, I like Farewell to Arms better.
Okay.
I love the
We'll
ending.
stop at that. That's rapid fire. The best company you ever worked for, I mean, excluding the one you work for now, in the previous 2 or 3 stints you've had.
I really enjoyed building the Honeywell Hometown Solutions
Okay,
India
so that's
Foundation.
favorite then, in some way.
Yeah.
Your favorite boss so far?
Anant Maheshwari, then country president for Honeywell,
Right,
now
now with
president Microsoft.
Do you have one professional role model? If so, who's that?
So in the Indian PR industry, it would be Prema Sagar. I think the way she built up Genesis and contributed to sort of formalizing the PR sector in the country is
Interesting.
is
You
valuable.
spoke of a consultancy leader. Name one Copcom person, a corporate communicator you admire very much.
This one's a tough one. Sangeeta Gale, who joined me as Senior Manager Corporate Communication and now heads CSR for Honeywell.
Nice. Interesting. Name one communications campaign in India that you wish you had worked on.
I will mention an ad campaign that particularly,
Fine.
this was the Pantene Pro-V advertisement,
Okay.
which talks about gender stereotypes. I don't know if you recall the video, you must watch it.
This is a hypothetical question. What happens after you retire?
I want to buy a 100-acre plot of land, run it as an organic and an eco-farming sort of an investment, and I want to make it more than sustainable, profitable. I want to be able to, my dream is to be able to work only with women farmers and create job opportunities for them, and do all of the zero environment damage kind of this thing. And I want to have 2 horses on the
Wow.
farm.
2 more to go. Your preferred or favorite holiday destination?
Any jungle by a river.
Nice. And finally, what's the motto you live by?
If you have to do it well, or don't do it at all.
Nice. So thank you so much, Madhavi, for your time, and it was great chatting with you. If there's anything that you felt you wanted to share but it never came up in the questions for this chat, mainly aiming at public relations and corporate communications professionals, both young and old, feel free to add those last comments if you have to.
I think, you asked that question, Amit, but it's closest to my heart, because I take my job and my profession personally, which a lot of people will tell you mustn't, but I take it personally, and it's really important for me that if you choose to be a communicator, be a damn good one. There is no excuse for being a communicator and being okay on language, being okay on grammar. It's just not acceptable. It's the ABC or the foundation of what you do.
Right.
It's your bread and butter, and you better be good at it. I have very little patience for people who will send a resume with a spelling mistake.
Interesting. So thank you once again, and I hope you enjoyed this chat as much as I did having it with you. Look forward to catching up with you offline as well. Thank you, Madhavi.
Thank you, Amit.
Thanks everyone for listening in. This was Madhavi Jha, the Chief Communications Officer of Cairn India on ComSpeak.